I greet you once again in the precious name of Jesus as we continue now on the cell group structuring, and we're going to talk about chapter 3, and we're going to talk about the first structuring. You see, there are basically 3 structures that I want to share with you during this lesson, and that's the first structure being the Jethro structure, and Jethro being after Moses' father-in-law that gave him wisdom. But that's called the 5x5 structure. And then there's the G12 structure that has been developed in Bogota, and which works very well in certain parts of the developing world. And then thirdly, we're going to do a combination of both those structures, which is now being called the Jethro 12 structure rather than the G12 structure. So in this chapter 3, we're going to talk firstly about the 5x5 structure or the Jethro system. This is the classic structure for the cell church around the world. Its major user is David Yonggi Cho, who has built the largest church in the world in South Korea. Jethro told Moses to restructure Israel into groups of 10s and 50s and hundreds and thousands so that they could more easily minister to the whole nation. You can read that in Exodus chapter 18 and verse 21. The cell group in the Jethro structure. The cell groups in the Jethro structure never grow larger than 15 members and will multiply when they reach this figure. So as soon as the cell in this system reaches 15, it's going to multiply. When the group reaches about 7 to 8 believers, they start training up members for the cell ministry. In other words, they start reproducing cell leaders because the group will soon get to the point where they need to multiply and you're going to need another cell leader. So these are potential cell leaders. Usually one of the members is identified as an intern or a potential cell leader. This intern completes the leadership training and is given opportunities to lead different parts of the cell. For example, a week in the welcome section, a week in the worship section, and a week in the actual ministering part of the cell meeting. Soon afterwards, the intern cell leader will lead the whole cell meeting under the supervision of his cell leader. So what we're doing here is we're just preparing the next cell leader for the purpose of the multiplication. Once the maximum size of the cell has been reached, the cell multiplies into 2 cells of 7 or 8 members. So in other words, the 15 is taken, 7 will go into a new cell, and 8 will remain in that cell, or vice versa, effectively multiplying that cell now into 2 cells. The intern leads the new cell that has multiplied from the existing cell. These 2 new cells begin the process again and evangelize their social context to grow their cell groups to 15 members, and then they will again multiply. So if you can understand the process, this 1 cell became 2 cells when it became 15. Those 2 cells then began to grow again from 7 or 8 members back to the 15, and then they multiplied again. So out of our original cell, we got 2 cells, which now have become 4 cells if they are multiplying together. So the multiplication is very rapid under such a system. The subzone. There's now a need. We've spoken here about the basic principle of the structuring multiplication of the cell under the Jethro system. We now talk about how the whole church becomes structured, we get the subzone. This structure is called the 5x5 structure because of the way that it groups cells together to form a subzone. When there are 5 cell groups, see, we started with 1, we multiplied, we then got 2, we went to 4. When we have a minimum of 5, we can now start our first zone. So we will group those 5 cells together in a zone, and then we will select what is the most successful cell leader out of those 5 cells and put that cell leader to be the zone leader over those 5 cells. He is called a zone supervisor. These zone supervisors serve these 5 cell leaders. The size of the zone is approximately 50 to 70 people in any aspect of the cell's growth. These subzones are usually formed geographically. You won't want to put a zone supervisor over a cell that's on one side of the town and another side of the town. You develop them practically so that it's easy for that supervisor to supervise the cells. It is important to maintain no more than 5 cells in a cell supervisor's group. If this standard is not maintained, then a lack of supervision and mentoring can cause some serious problems. The zone supervisors are usually not paid workers in the church, but volunteer their time. Now let's talk about the zone, because that is the subzone that we have just talked about. The zone is formed when 5 subzones are grouped together. A successful zone supervisor is promoted to a zone pastor. So you now have a zone pastor. The reason being is you got 5 subzones with zone supervisors who already had 5 cells under them. That's why it's called a 5x5 principle. I got 5 cells, I put a subzone supervisor over those 5 cells. When I had 5 subzones, it now became necessary to install a zone pastor over those 5 subzones. So if you look at the diagram there, you will see perfectly simply how that works. So this zone pastor will serve 5 zone supervisors and their 25 cell groups. A zone averages about 250 people. So when I look at it now, I see a cell group leader leads 15 people. When that comes that size, it multiplies. When it has got to 5 cell groups, I then put in the subzone supervisor over those 5 cell groups who will look after 50 to 70 people. When I have 5 of those subzones, I need to train and install a zone pastor who will look after those 5 zones, which include 25 cell groups, which make up 250 people as a part of my church. At this level, most Jethro structured churches hire the zone pastor full time. You can see the reason for that. To care for 250 people is no longer a part-time job. So if it's possible, you will need to hire that person full time. The next step from here up is the district. The district is formed when 5 zones are put together. A successful zone pastor now becomes a district pastor. A district pastor serves 5 zone pastors. That is his whole responsibility. 25 zone supervisors and 125 cell groups now become his responsibility. An average district would have at least 1,000 people. So you need to see the practical sense in the structuring of the cell church and why you have some churches that have been able to grow so large and yet care for their people. If we take the church that we mentioned earlier of Dr. Yonggi Cho, which is somewhere in the vicinity of either close or more than 1 million people, you understand how under this system you can end up caring for those sort of numbers of people and minister to them properly, whereas the program church would be inhibited when you got over 20 or 30,000 members. That is why this structure for reaching a city is a very effective structure. I greet you once more in the precious name of Jesus. As we continue on chapter 3, the Jethro structure for the cell church structure, which we term the 5x5 structure. And we're going to talk now about the basic principles of the 5x5 model. Firstly, there must be a comprehensive training track. For example, the Encounter 1 right through to Encounter 4, equipping steps, as well as Process 1 through to Process 4. That takes the new believer to the level where they can lead a cell group. The time period for this is 6 months to a year. If this does not happen, then there would soon be a shortage of leaders to take over the new cell groups that are multiplying. So it's vital that we keep training people through those processes, through the equipping track, to make sure that the multiplication can work within the cell system. Each cell leader in the 5x5 structure is responsible to mentor 2 or 3 members in his cell group. Out of these members, the cell leader will choose his intern, who will then train to take over the new cell group once the multiplication happens. Without intern leaders, the cells would not therefore be able to multiply. Thirdly, a constant sense of urgency must be created to see every cell member reach out to unbelievers. The structure will become ineffective if the primary purpose of evangelism is not maintained. I think this is the most important factor in any cell structure. And in the churches that have converted, in churches that have sown cell structured churches, they have found this to be one of the challenges, and that is to get the people mobilized within the cell groups to reach out, to really reach into their community, to reach the unbeliever, because Christians enjoy fellowship. And you know, home cell or cell group is an ideal opportunity to have home fellowship and to fellowship with one another, enjoy worshiping the Lord. And it's really an enjoyable form of Christian relationship. So if we don't keep that urgency and if we don't keep that vision before the people's eyes and keep that motivation going, then you will see that the ability of those cell groups to evangelize will fall away. And therefore, the cell church would not be effective. Let's talk about the 100% growth goal. 5x5 cell churches around the world often have a ratio of at least 1 new convert for every 3 to 4 cell members every 6 to 12 months. This means that the 5x5 structure has a potential to, in fact, double itself every year in its best scenario. Most 5x5 churches set their goal to double the number of cells every year. So that is the goal of vibrant, growing cell churches, that if this year they have 200 cells, then they would want to see a multiplication to 400 the next year. It's a goal that has definitely been achieved in a number of cell churches, but it is an aggressive goal. However, I believe that is the sort of goal we need to trust God for. Let's talk about interest groups and homogeneous groups. Mature cell members can target family members or friends to start special outreach cells at their workplace or recreational club. So in the office, you can start a lunchtime cell. In the gym or in the sports club, you can get people together who have like interests and begin a cell where you just have time together. Even if you're putting together a group of unbelievers into that cell, that's the whole purpose of the cell, remember? It's for outreach. So you're not going to start, with a normal format in which you will be sharing the word. You're going to start with interest things. Talking about the sport you're involved in, talking about the interest group you're involved in, or the business group. And then as you establish relationship, so you will slowly change over to talking about the gospel, and finally you'll be running a cell group that has newly saved members in it. Christian teachings can be presented alongside other courses of interest. For example, dressmaking, fishing, pottery, just whatever you find that your friends that you have influence over have an interest in. Visitors that become members can then join a normal cell group, or the outreach cell can eventually become a normal church cell group. It is a proven fact that people from a similar homogeneous group associate with each other, and cells grow rapidly in an environment where these groups meet together. Let me give you another example. Women who have been in a career and have recently had children and are spending some time at home bringing up the little babies and so on. There's a number of those women who found a lot of stimulating interest in the workplace, and although they are thoroughly enjoying, having their babies and so on, they need the stimulation. So there's a great opportunity there to start a cell group amongst them so that you can have that interaction, and it'll eventually lead to reaching them with the gospel. For a complete, detailed description of every function of a cell leader, zone supervisor, zone pastor, and district pastor in the 5x5 structure, we have compiled for you a complete list of how those duties work. Let me just go through some of the more important things. You will see in the first one, we have in cell meeting, then we have what the cell leader does, we have what the zone supervisor does, we have what the zone pastor does, and if applicable, what the district pastor would do with all those different duties. The first part of the function is welcoming the people. Under the cell leader, we have to conduct icebreakers in the cell meeting. In other words, to get people to feel relaxed, to make a little joke, to welcome them, to do that form of thing, to model leading icebreakers for the person who's also studying under you as an intern. The zone supervisor would need to evaluate the performance of the cell leader in these things. In other words, are we creating a relaxed environment, or are we creating a religious environment? A religious environment is never going to work in the cell church. The purpose of the cell church is to create a cell type of relationship that enables people to relax and to interact and to bring the whole Christian learning and understanding into a practical application mode. So the zone supervisor would need to evaluate that. The zone pastor and district pastor doesn't have a function in those. Then we come to worship. It says under the cell leader to prepare and lead worship in the cell meeting, to conduct monthly Lord's Supper in the cell group, to identify worship leaders and provide opportunities for them to move into worship leading. On the zone supervisor, it says to evaluate the worship and feedback to the cell leader, to model leading worship if necessary, to model conducting the Lord's Supper if necessary. In other words, to come up, and assist and support the cell leader in that. We then go to the Word. And here, of course, we have the cell leader involved to prepare and conduct an edification time, resulting in application and ministry to the cell members. Under the zone supervisor, we have to evaluate the edification time and feedback to the cell leader. Now, when we come down to the works, we start to see all of these categories involved here. Under the cell leader, we see to motivate cell members' involvement in evangelism programs. Under the zone supervisor, we see to coordinate and monitor the interest group's efforts in the subzone and to monitor feedback readiness of cells in the subzone for evangelism. Remember, this is the working part of the cell. The zone pastor needs to develop continuing strategy for target areas in the zone. He needs to assign cell groups for evangelism. The district pastor needs to develop continuing strategy for target penetration of the whole district and to link up projects with the district and develop strategies for evangelism. So you can see from this, we have laid out a total format here that gives you in every application of the cell group under this 5x5 or Jethro system, which person, the cell leader, the zone supervisor, the zone pastor, or the district pastor would be involved in what way in every one of these tasks. We go from works to equipping. Then we go to outside cell meetings and cell life. We go to multiplication. We notice under multiplication, this is the one place where the cell leader doesn't make the decisions. It comes to the zone supervisor's responsibility to negotiate with the cell leader on the multiplication of the group, and also the zone pastor to make a decision on the multiplication of the cell. We then go to leader development, and of course, here the different aspects like the zone supervisor, zone pastor, and district pastor really comes into play with the training of people within the cells. I'll give you just amongst the cell leaders. The cell leaders' responsibilities is to identify potential cell leaders and to bring them into internship, to monitor cell leader intern undergoing training classes, and to equip the cell leader intern during internship. As far as the zone supervisor goes, they would care for leaders by visiting, encouraging, and praying for them, to interview, evaluate, and endorse potential cell leader interns for training, to monitor internship of cell leader interns, and to monitor equipping of the cell leaders. as far as the zone pastor is concerned, to care for present leaders by visiting, encouraging, and praying for them, to conduct cell leaders intern training, and also to monitor internship of cell leaders intern, and to equip and monitor the equipping of the cell leader. As far as the district pastor goes, it would be to appoint the cell leader intern into leadership and release him then to start his own cell group. To schedule cell leaders intern training for the district, we see how the responsibility works in this whole structure. We also then come into the zone supervisors internship and then the zone pastors internship, and we see what role everybody plays in that. We then come to Sunday services and what role is played in that. For instance, here we only have the zone pastor who is to plan and schedule reminders to the cell leaders of their involvement, because they're going to be involved in the new converts. We then go to hospital visits. We go to baptism of memberships. We go to bereavement, also deliverance, which is such an important aspect of growth in the church. We go to counseling. Who plays the role in the counseling? For instance, the cell leader is to identify members who need further counseling. On the zone supervisor, he will assess the short-term versus chronic cases and redirect to the zone pastor if required. And the zone pastor will redirect to the district pastor. So again, we see the responsibility. We then have weddings, we have vision, we have the new converts, visitors of new members, we have prayer, and then we have teamwork within the cell. So as you've seen those things all flash up on the screen, it's important within this study lesson to realize also that you can go into the note section of your DVD lesson and you will have all of those schedules and graphs there for you so that you can copy them, study them, and do whatever is necessary. We move on now to chapter 4, and we're now going to talk about the groups of 12 structure, or the G12 structure for cell churches. It differs from the Jethro structure in a number of ways. Cesar Castellanos of Bogota in Colombia actually developed this structure. He first launched his church by using the 5x5 structure and grew to 3,000 members, and then realized that he could, for his environment, his situation, improve by developing this new structure. So he then changed his structure, focusing on planting new cells instead of multiplying existing groups. That is one of the biggest changes in that structure. Let's talk about how does the G12 structure work. A leader will start the structure by identifying 12 people that will form part of his cell group. So in the system, right from the start, you need to understand there are no zone pastors, zone supervisors, or district pastors. It doesn't work on that basis. It works solely on the basis of cell groups that are organized in 12 members to the cell. A leader will start the structure, as I said, by identifying 12 people. This cell group will be called the mother cell group. Remember, the leader of this mother cell will be the senior pastor. And within his cell, he will have what is going to be the core leadership group of the church. So that becomes the mother cell. The leader then imparts valuable principles and goals to these 12 people of his mother's cell. The relationship between the leader and these 12 cell people will never be broken once they plant their own cell group. So, out of these 12 people that are in the mother cell, every one of those 12 members will then at some stage begin their own cell and start to develop 12 people around them. All right, so each one of those 12 members will then start to develop their own cell, which firstly shows the mother cell, which has the senior pastor in the center and the 12 daughter cells around it. Then we go on to the next diagram, which shows the daughter cells, or the next generation of cells that grow off of the original 12, and each one of those have 12 cells. Amen. The goal of the mother cell is for each person to plant his own cell group on a different evening. And this is very important to understand because it's very integral to this whole system. It's the basis of which this system works. And incidentally, this system works well in the developing world in this sense. It's a great system for getting information of the church downwards and upwards in the church, because it can be fed into the cells and it can be fed back from the cells. And regardless of whether you have 350,000 people or 500 people in your church, you can feed information to every single member every week and have information come back every week. And I'll show you in a moment how that happens. So, for instance, the mother cell will meet on a Monday evening. So the pastor, the senior pastor, with his 12 cell members will meet together on Monday evening. He will then minister to them, impart vision to them, so on and so forth. The daughter cells, in other words, the 12 people who were in the mother cell have now gone out and started their own cell group, which will eventually have 12 members in them, which we call the daughter cell. That will meet on Tuesday nights. Once you have reached the point where you now are saturating the daughter cells, you got the original 12, each one of those 12 went out and established a cell with 12 people in it. In other words, you are now up to 144 people already within that cell church. It's time now, or even in the development of those cells, that as soon as someone is getting near to 12 people, that people start branching out of those cells and start their own cell group so that they again can multiply. And the name given to that is the granddaughter cell. So we had the mother cell meets with the pastor and 12 people on Monday nights. The daughter cell, which were those 12 people who now started their cell, they meet on Tuesday nights. The people from those cell groups have gone out and started their own cell groups, and that now became the granddaughter cell structure, and they meet on Wednesday nights. Now, if you do your multiplication, you will see that when that is saturated, you have already reached quite a large number of people in your church structure. But from there, you go to the great granddaughter cell, and then that again goes out on a Thursday night, which already brings you well over 100,000 people that are in your cell structure. I've given you that picture so that you understand, and in seeing these diagrams, you will very easily understand the simplicity of the structure. And yet, the structure is able to care for large numbers of people, taking the information, the teaching of the church throughout the whole church. Even if everybody is not able to make the celebration service on a Sunday because of lack of space, you can still feed the ministry down through the whole church, regardless of size. Amen. The principle of the G12 structure. Every person in a G12 cell is viewed as a potential leader. This system is worked on the basis that everyone can become a leader of 12 people. And everyone only needs to be a leader of 12 people. All of the people of the G12 cell group are challenged to lead their own group. The cell group may become a little larger than 12 because a couple is counted as one member. Unless they are starting their own cell, then they each become a member. A person only becomes a member once he has planted his own G12 cell group. A G12 cell may reach up to 17 people on this basis. 12 of these people plant their own G12 cells and become members of that cell. The remaining 5 people get given to one of the members to form part of their new G12 cell. Every leader in the G12 structure attends 2 cell meetings weekly. See, this is a phenomena that you need to understand about this structure that's different to the Jethro system. Remember, in the Jethro system, we had the Sunday celebration, and then we have the cells meeting in the week, normally all on one night. And each cell really interprets Sunday's message. So each cell leader is in fact only receiving input on Sundays and then transmitting that to the cell. In the G12 system, he's receiving it on Sunday, but he's having direct contact with a cell leader that's over him. Everybody excepting the senior pastor is a cell member. See, in the Jethro system, everybody who's a cell leader is a cell leader, but they're not a cell member. In the G12 system, everyone who is a cell leader is also a cell member, with the exception of the senior pastor. So everyone goes to a cell group and also administers a cell group. So the 12 who are in the pastor's cell, they come on Monday nights, receive from the pastor. Tuesday nights, they go give it to their cell group. Their growth receives on Tuesday night and goes and gives to the cell groups on Wednesday night. So everybody is in fact attending a cell group and leading a cell group. It's one of the strong features of this system, especially, as I said, in the developing world. Thus, they never leave their mother or lead a cell. They develop their own cell. Cells develop out of their cells, but they remain a member of the original cell instead of the multiplication in the Jethro system. In this structure, there is no need for zone supervisors, zone pastors, or district pastors. So in effect, if you are running in a very, poor economy, where it is difficult to support many pastors in the church, this becomes an ideal structure to be able to minister to a large church without having to have many full-time pastors. The instructions are given by the senior pastors to his group of 12, who then pass it down to their group, who then in turn pass it down to their structure. In Caesar's church, a leader only becomes full-time when they have 500 cells that are falling under their structure. So in amongst that original 12 who are the pastor's cells, you must remember their 12 went out and made 12 more cells, and then they multiplied again. Finally, under that one stream of the original 12, you're going to have over 500 cells of 12 people that are operating. Then they become a full-time pastor. So you can see that it really cuts down the numbers needed to administrate and pastor a church effectively. Doesn't cut down on the effectiveness. You can pastor a church effectively with this system. There is therefore no need to train these leaders, but this makes reporting difficult, and many other problems also arise with it. Your whole monitoring process is a lot more difficult this way because you're relying only on your cell group leaders to constantly feed the information back. The equipping system has to be rapid enough to keep up with the planting of cells. In third world countries, the G12 works very well because information is passed verbally down. The cell network from mother to daughter to granddaughter to great-granddaughter is a very rapid process. I have actually visited churches like that where they have made arrangements for someone to come in and preach after the Sunday celebration for next Sunday. So there's no chance to advertise in the Sunday service or anything like that. But just through the pastor talking to his cell on Monday night, and then the information feeding through, the church is inundated with people on the following Sunday. So it's an extremely effective way of being able to put either ministry or other information through a large church at very low cost. One can also see that if you are, in need of buildings, like in many places in Africa we are, where it's not easy to have big buildings to be able to have a large church, you can see that the G12 system will enable you to have a large church without the need of such huge buildings, because you can get together for celebration even in the open air. You can do so many, because you don't need all the other aspects. See, everything is being fed through your G12 cell group. So your youth ministry, your children's ministry, all of that type of ministry can easily be fed through your cells. And Sunday celebration is a getting together and a preaching of the word. Often in Bogota, they use the stadium so that all of them or part of them can come together on the one Sunday.